Hi, this is Huang Zhenyu, and welcome to another episode of China 411. I'm here with my co-host Ken Wilcox, and today we're going to talk about being an entrepreneur. Ken?
In China.
Yes.
In China. But before we get started, I still want to ask you why you keep calling yourself Huang Zhengyu instead of just Z. That would be like me saying my name is Kenneth P. Wilcox or Kenneth Parmalee Wilcox, and everybody just calls me Ken. Can't we just call you Z?
Of course, Ken.
Okay.
Or Mr. K.
Yeah, no.
It's just
We're
not
not going to do
everyone.
that.
Not everyone has your fine pronunciation of Chinese.
So today we've got a good guest. And you want to tell us a tiny bit about him before we ask him to introduce himself?
Yeah, before I introduce our guest, I really want to just talk about some of the things I'm interested in and you're interested in hearing.
Yeah.
For me, is to really understand it. The last 30 years, our guest has been part of that upheaval and that transformation. And he started a business that actually has gone through multiple phases. That for me is interesting. And how did, entrepreneurship take root in China, and where is it going? Where is it now and where is it going? That for me is fascinating. What about you?
So I think that's probably the main point. I would also like to get a little bit of his views on the Chinese economy today, because he's right in the thick of it, and probably being on that side of the ocean as opposed to this side, he has some insight into what's happening in the economy in China. And I also think it'd be very interesting to hear a little bit at the end maybe about his views on sending his daughter here to school.
Yeah, that coming back and forth.
Coming back and forth, and it seems to be a much more common experience today than it used to be, that a lot of Chinese parents are sending their children to America for some kind of education, whether it be at high school or college. So maybe we got a lot of things to talk about.
All right, well, without further ado, let me introduce our guest, Mr. Simon Ma, who's an experienced entrepreneur from Beijing. Simon?
Hello. Yeah, my name is Simon, and we started a company over 20 years ago in Beijing, and focus at performing IT software and the services mainly for enterprises and businesses. And back then, there was like a very little IT software and services back in China. So we literally see that industry, starting from zero, and now, to a sizable industry right now. And personally, I think I witnessed, the economic growth in China, through that many years.
How did that come about? What resulted in your starting this company in China 20 years ago? What were you doing before that, and how did it happen?
Yes, before that I was working with IBM as a software engineer, and
In Beijing?
actually in Silicon Valley.
In Silicon Valley?
Right, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And then we thought about that China economic is booming, and then we thought that we'd go back and take a look. But then after we go back, there's nothing to see really.
Really?
IT services, when they say economy is booming, they refer more to the manufacturing sector, not the IT sector. But gradually, the requirement, to have like IT, computer to manage the business activities becomes more and more popular. They start to have this mindset to run the company using those tools.
So this was about 1995, 96, something like
94,
that?
yes.
94. You were here in Silicon Valley. You
Right.
were working for IBM,
Right.
and you and maybe some friends
Right.
decided to go back to China
Right.
and see what was going on in IT and maybe start something. How many were there?
Well, my wife, Heidi.
Oh,
Yeah.
your wife Heidi.
Right,
You and
right.
Heidi
Yeah,
went back
went
to
back.
Beijing,
Right,
and
right,
you
right.
thought about starting this company.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Mhm.
So were you the two founders, you and your wife?
Right. Yes.
And then who else joined you over time?
over time, we hired people in Beijing. Yeah, and then we have developed certain kind of programs for those businesses, and it's like I still remember back then those companies, they are more focused at doing something very technical, buying hardware, computing like MIPS, milling instructions per second type of thing, really technical, but not so much about how you can use those software to help manage the company, So we were there, talking with our customers and tell them, you can actually, use those things to manage your company better.
And that was new at that point in
Right,
time
right,
in
right.
China.
Right.
It was a new idea. How did people respond to it?
Well, as every new things, it takes a little time for people to get used to it, right? I still remember our first customer, in China. It was a bank, right? And there was one day, they had, they bought like a, huge mainframe, right? And then they developed their own software programs, to manage those banking operations, right? Everything goes well until one day, there was like, all the phones ring, and then they start to see all these, like strange messages from the screens, right? And then all of a sudden, those ATMs won't work. Some of those, teller, systems stopped and so forth, right? And they look all over the place trying to find where it's wrong, and they couldn't, And finally, they talked to us, and we went in and take a look. It was really, the development process that's wrong, and what they were, running is one version of software, and they're looking at, checking, trying to debug it is another version. So they are looking at the wrong thing, trying to identify, the problems, right? So and then, we're trying to help them to use the right, development method, so that things will be more organized and in sync. Yeah.
So, how was it starting a business 20 years ago? What were your biggest challenges?
Oh, yes.
Describe to us
Yeah. Okay.
the
thank you.
emotional feeling of
Yes,
being there.
Yes. Well, first the emotional feeling is really excitement. We thought we'll be like successful tomorrow, right? And but then reality is that you open business and you have to take care of everything. So me and my wife, literally, we're the CEO, president, CFO, secretary. Everything is ourselves, right? And then we start to hire people back in China, and then it's really you have to fill in all those gaps. It's so much different than working with IBM, where all these things are taken care of, right? You only worry about your own job, so to speak. But as an entrepreneur, you have to take care of everything. It's like if everything is your job, right? And initially, of course, you had to worry about how to acquire your customers, right? And then you have to worry about how to manage the staff, and, the whole crew and so forth.
But what about working in China that surprised you the most?
Well, working in China, I think there's several specific compared to U.S., right? Specific challenges. One is that the legal environment was not set up, especially back then. It's so much better now compared than it was like 20 years ago, right? But still now, it's still not complete, or still not as sophisticated as compared to the U.S., right? And so there are, things it's like it's not clear, as to what is the right thing to do, because it's, there aren't, specific laws about it, right? And then you have to understand, something called, like, pseudo law, right? So, a lot of these government officials, they assume, this is what you're supposed to do, right? It's not written in code, but it's like, so you have to, initially you have to get used to it, right? Back then there are a lot of technical people. You can hire those guys. They're really good, at doing technicals, right? But there's very little, mindset about how to make this thing work for the customer, so that this thing will grow with the customer, right? So the business side of this technology is really missing, right? I've seen, those technical people, they're so good at those technicals. They change the source code of Windows, right, and make it work better. The only thing is that a new version came in, you can't upgrade it, because once you upgrade, you lose all those binary codes, right? So those are the things that I've never thought about, but later on, I'd have to be very careful.
And have you seen that evolve much, these issues or challenges over the past 20 years?
Oh yeah. Now it's getting more, a lot better compared with then.
One thing I'm curious about is that how you got the funding. Where'd you get the money to do the startup? Because most entrepreneurs here in Silicon Valley, when they start a company and they need funding, they go to some form of venture capitalist.
Yes.
Sometimes it's single individuals, sometimes it's venture capital firms, sometimes it's angels, but it's all in the end some form of venture capital.
Right.
But 1994, 1995, I'm not sure there was anything like that in China. So what did you, of course there is today, but then I don't think there was. What did you do for money, for funding?
Yes. That's a very good question. Thank you. Back then, we got our first money from angels, our friends. And so we started this company, and so we have to be very careful about cash flow, manage all these cash flows, so make sure that we never run short of cash, and plan it accordingly. And fortunately, when we get our customers, we get paid very quickly, and so that lasted. But this is a constraint to grow the business. We could have grow business much faster had we have sufficient fund, of course, right? But later on, we talked to a number of private equities, and including CVCI, the venture capitalist arm of Citigroup back then, and they were really interested, and they thought this is a great sector that they want to invest and so forth, and they eventually invested in the company, and then we about 4 years later, we did an IPO at New York Stock Exchange. So they have a way to exit, so everybody is happy.
Everybody's happy.
Yes.
Are you still on the New York Stock Exchange?
No. After 4 years, we took it private. They were at a time, I think the Chinese stock didn't perform very well at New York Stock Exchange, and the price, as we judge it, is a way below its real value. So we decided to take it private.
Are the products today, what are the main products today compared with when you started 20 years ago? Yeah.
We help those enterprises to manage their business better, right? So there are the way we view it. There are several categories that we do. First is the management part, and then the business part. the thing that they want to sell, right? Our customer wants to sell, and you have a system to help them do all these things, right? And on the business management side, the more traditional way of doing it is called like a ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning, right? And then on the business side, each different industry, they have their own specific sort of business software, like banking, right? You have core banking, you have credit card system, you have, a number of other systems, right? And for like automobile manufacturers, they have also, their own specific business type of software. But now, it's like things are changing a little bit, right? Because with the help of internet, more and more business are doing business on internet, right? And a lot of those management activities has to adapt to a new way of doing business, right? And therefore, sometimes, the management part gets so much more complex. For example, so one thing that we did for like one of our customers, which is the largest home appliance manufacturer in China, and they make TVs, washing machines, refrigerators, and you name it, right? And they have, business units set up that way. And it used to be, when we do the ERP for them, one small module or, function, as we call it, is like a logistics. You have to ship the products to where they're selling, right? Back then it was simple. You have carload and train load of TV, to Beijing, and then once it's reached the station, it's the distributor. It's their hands. So it's not my problem anymore, right? But it was then. Later on, the so-called e-commerce, right, and online shopping, it becomes, the mainstream. So what happened is that, a lot of orders came in from like Tianmao, Taobao, Jingdong, and so forth, right? And each order is not a train load; it's one unit, right? And if you have to ship one by one, all over the country, then the logistic cost would be, it'll be huge, right? So obviously the system has to be redesigned so that you can consolidate, single orders into train loads to different locations, and also make the system connect with the local logistic vendors, so you know exactly where the merchandise is, right? And the new system, integrates the internet, the old management part, and so forth, and becomes a new system. And
So it's quite exciting how kind of your business adjusted with kind of the changes in the Chinese economy, right?
Yes,
That economic
yes.
model. So what opportunities, we've talked about challenges, what opportunities do you see in China today for your business and for, businesses in general? And
Yes,
what are the
yes.
benefits
Yes,
of
yes.
being an entrepreneur in China?
Yes. Well, that's a very exciting question, actually. I think in terms of IT, in China, it's still in the development stage. It's far from complete. When we talk about those management, talk about business side of software. It's far from sophisticated yet. And we can, right now, what I'm seeing is that, people are doing, what they have to do, right now. So a lot of customers, when they talk to us, they don't have a clear idea of what they need to do. But it's like they've got something really urgent. They have to have internet support. Because it's like the trend, right? If they don't have it, they can't survive, right? As to how to integrate this internet strategy into their business, they have very little idea, right? So we need to provide like a consulting service for them, and then discuss with them, to make sure the IT strategy fits with their business strategy.
But what if you take a level above your own business?
Yes.
What are some systematic opportunities for entrepreneurs in China? Have you seen any benefits for you having started a business in China, and why you continue to do business in China?
Right. Yeah. Well, this is like the area where it's like almost vacant back then, and now it's not vacant, but there's still a lot of opportunity, and the Chinese market is so big, and I think it actually can be like a platform for a lot of entrepreneurs to be successful, and in all these sectors, all these industries, you can see that they need a lot of those, IT software and services. So I think the potential is still very big, and that's what makes me so excited.
Is when you think about, because you were here in Silicon Valley for how many years?
For 8 years, yeah.
8 years.
Yes.
So you have some experience, although it was 20 years ago, but you have some experience doing business here in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
And you've got now 20 years of experience of doing business in China.
Yes.
What are the, if you had to compare a little bit, what are the big advantages of doing business in China today?
Right.
And what do you imagine to be, if any, some of the advantages of doing business in say, California, by comparison?
Right. Well, by comparing, I think in Chinese environment is that they need a lot of things. A lot of things are new. If somehow you can find something that they need, it's a great. It'll be like an opportunity for a business, right? In the U.S., the infrastructure is so much better, right? I still remember when we are talking about setting up the company and invite the angels to invest. We find lawyers. They know exactly what you are doing, you want to do. They set things very quickly. So all these service lawyers, accountants, and everything is ready. It's and another big advantage in Silicon Valley is that there are a lot of new ideas flowing around, and a lot of people are playing with new technologies, whether they can find an application or not. They are doing it, right? And this is very important because you're working on something that doesn't have application right now doesn't mean they don't have application 3 or 5 years down the road, right? And a lot of those new technology, when they first develop, it seems like useless. But then there are something else that developed. All of a sudden, they click, right, and it becomes like something very useful. So I think those are the things we really have to keep an eye on those things.
That's in the U.S. you're talking about.
Right.
How's that different in China?
Well, in China, people are not, they are so much focused on serving their customers, not so much about, developing those technologies. And I think, that's one thing is, there's several factors, why it's that, right? First of all, a lot of companies are still small, so they may not have a lot of resources, going into those research development. And secondly, it's like the intellectual property protection laws are still not sophisticated yet, right? So that presents a lot of risk. If you invest a lot of money into something and then if it's not protected, then it's a risk, right? So I think there's a lot of factors in that why a lot of Chinese companies are not doing it, whereas in Silicon Valley you can see a lot of those startups are doing those interesting technologies.
That's an interesting thing, though, because if you could take this one step further, think about this. If it's generally true that the entrepreneurial companies in, let's say, California, but probably U.S., are more focused on developing interesting new technologies, and on the other hand, in China, they're less focused on developing new technologies in general and more focused on satisfying customer needs. That could also help to explain why American companies often have difficulty when they get to China, because maybe they're not as focused on the needs of customers as the Chinese companies would be. Because I do know that a lot of American companies that have gone to China have had difficulties. And a lot of times it feels like the Chinese customer doesn't feel their need is being met.
Or I may want to update that just a little bit by saying, I think American companies are great at servicing American customer needs. And they might not localize as well to adjust to Chinese tastes. That could be it. But what do you think, Simon?
Well, there are multiple factors, right? It's like most of the U.S. companies operating in China, they don't have like a local sort of modifications, right? So everything that is like a standard worldwide, whereas Chinese company, if you're focusing the China market, you're willing to adapt your product and services more to the Chinese customers, and sometimes if you don't do those modifications, the local customer will have like correct or not, right? Have like a feeling that this company is really arrogant, right? Because they are not willing to change anything.
The foreign
right,
company
right.
is arrogant.
Yes.
Yeah, because they're not
Right.
willing to.
Willing to make like a simple changes for us. But the reality is that the international companies, they cannot do any changes on their products or services, right?
So I'd like to switch gears a little bit. We had a chance to talk to your daughter, Rebecca.
Right.
And she's now here studying in the U.S.
Yes,
and she's probably going to go to a very nice college. She's going to start a business, and she wants to
Hopefully,
stay
yes,
in the U.S. What do you want her to do?
Well, I'm really open, see, what she wants to do, right? But right now, she has a lot of ideas. She has all these, things that she wants to do. And I think, she has not formed, like a final firm idea of what her career will be now yet, right? So I'm encouraging her, to explore, all different of her interests and see how it turns out, right? So I don't have like a fixed mind, what I want her to do. But it looks like she has a lot of interest in economics and business.
But why did you send her to international school?
Oh, I think it's like it is very important to understand both cultures, the Western culture and also the Oriental culture, and I think the American culture is is very important for her career in the future, and so is the Chinese culture, So the Chinese local schools, they, you know, they are very focused on, you know, the Chinese part of their culture. You know, they have very little exposure to the, you know, cultures outside of China, right? So I think I want her to have like a both, and you know, therefore the international school.
Do you want her to go back to China one day to develop?
Well, that'll depend, you know, on what she will be doing. Yeah, but I hope, you know, I think, you know, most likely she'll be, you know, going back and forth because both countries, you know, they have their, in terms of business and economic, you know, they have their own strengths, right? You know, in those areas, and I'm hoping that, you know, with like a dual culture, she'll be able to, you know, to sort of understand, you know, the benefits of those, you know, of both countries.
How is the economy doing in China today? We read a lot about the Chinese economy. There are some economists, Western economists, that think the Chinese economy is although it's slowed down, is still
Right.
moving in a very good direction and will continue. And then there are others that are concerned. They see real serious issues. And where do you come out on that?
Yeah,
How does it
yeah.
look to you?
You know, the way I see it is that, you know, Chinese economy has been growing, you know, for 30 years, right? And the primary driver of this growth was the manufacturing sector and also the arbitrage of the low labor cost, right? But that is, you know, advantage is shrinking. So the country is, you know, undergoing a transition period. You know, they need to transition from a low labor cost to high value added type of products, right? But, you know, this transition, I think, is going to take time. And during this transition, I think, you know, the growth that we see, you know, is going to slow down, right? And I think, you know, we already seen that, right? But I think, you know, it's eventually, you know, it'll come out of this transition period and maybe, you know, regain the growth and so forth. But what I'm seeing is the other factor that's also very important is that, you know, now people are more focused on the quality of life as, you know, compared to like just the growth of economy, right? It used to be, you know, everybody is so, you know, motivated and excited about economic growth, right? Now I see, you know, those younger generations, they are more, you know, relaxed and enjoy life, you know. So quality of life becomes like more important. But when, you know, we look at the whole economy, I think, you know, it's like when it's going through this transition, right? Areas where they used to have like a concentration of factories, mainly because of low labor, right? Those areas, you know, often experience some trouble because of, you know, the labor cost now is higher, and so therefore, you know, those factory cannot, you know, sustain, you know, what or enjoy the level of profit that they used to, right? And the more, you know, advanced areas, cities like Shanghai, you know, or Jiangsu, you know, Shenzhen, right? They probably have already come over that transition period. So now in those cities, you don't see those lower labor cost type of factories anymore. You see more, you know, higher end type of service, you know, and so forth, you know, technology and so forth, right, in those cities. So I see that, you know, this transition is taking place. And for some of the places, they may have already done that, right? But in general, you know, China is such a large country. I think it'll still take time, right? For some of those areas, there might be a lot of difficulties, right? It's it's all relative.
So I have a kind of a general question. You came to the U.S. in 1983, is that
Yes,
right?
yes.
For graduate school,
Right. Yes.
And where did you go to graduate school?
UC Santa Barbara.
UC Santa Barbara. What were you studying?
Mathematics and computer science.
Mathematics, computer science. So that was in an era when Chinese were just beginning
Right.
to leave China and come to California in particular, but also other places in the U.S. and in the U.K. to go to school. But it was at the beginnings of that movement.
Right.
So you came early on,
Yes.
and looking back, are you glad you did that?
Oh yes, definitely. It's like before then, before I came to the U.S., my view of the U.S. is so much different than I am now, right? Or after I came to the U.S. It's and I think I've been really fortunate, to have the opportunity to come over and understand, all the the American cultures and the way American do things, right? And after I joined IBM, I think I learned another set of skills where I see how the Americans manage their companies, how those business are done, in like a orderly fashion. Right? So I'm really glad that I did that.
And China has changed a huge amount since
Right.
1983.
Yes.
And so what would be the biggest changes that you have seen between 1983 and today in China?
Well, there's a lot. I think, I can't name, like a single change. If there are several, layers of change that I can see, right? Back then, you don't see high rise. It's like the tallest building in Shanghai was like the Park Hotel, which is like 24 floors, right? Now it's like compared to the other buildings, it's like it's a very small building, right? That's what you can see, from outside. But I think the more change is more, the bigger change is more in the inside. The way people, think about things. The way people, talk about things, right? It used to be, China was very closed. They've, in terms of political, economic, everything, right? But now it's much more open, and regular, people in China, they, take vacations, outside of China, right? And they experience a lot of different things, and they have different, ideas about their own life. So I think that's so much different than when I was there.
Do you think you ever live in the U.S. again?
Oh yeah. Right now I'm going back and forth. I come here very frequently.
So I think last year you bought a house here in California.
Yes.
Is that
correct.
right? Do you
Yes,
think
yes.
you'll ever occupy it full time?
I don't know yet. But right now I can't. I'm still on travel basis. Yeah.
You still have your company.
Right.
You're pretty busy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And this wraps up another episode of China 411. This is Huang Zhenyu, and see you in the future.